It was a horrible, violent attack on an elderly male. He was lying there, bleeding. He'd been stabbed.
The nature of the stabbing is brutal. The perpetrator appears to be somebody who really wanted to kill.
Last thing that people would ever think would happen. All of a sudden, people being fearful of their lives.
Our role is to recover the evidence. We're collectors of evidence. But sometimes the evidence just isn't there to prove who's attacked and murdered this gentleman.
This was a real critical incident. I think it's fair to say we're all worried because it was escalating, the threat was increasing. We felt under a lot of pressure to catch this person.
So there's a lot of work going on in the background trying to find that evidence before it's too late, because the offender might strike again.
The call came in late in the evening about a man who'd been attacked in the street. This was clearly a very, very violent attack. The priority at a crime scene such as this, first of all, who is the person? So that's important for us to try and identify who they are. But then it's about gathering the best evidence, and we just want to catch the person before anything else happened.
Residents identify the man as 82-year-old Mohammed Saleem. Paramedics find he has lost a lot of blood and waste no time blue lighting him to hospital as CSIs enter the scene.
I've been to a number of scenes like this where literally you attend the site where an incident's happened and there's nothing there, bar blood.
Detectives turn to the CSIs to understand what happened to Mohammed and what could have driven the attacker to use such violence.
Distribution of blood at a crime scene can be really important because it helps to build a story and build a pattern as to what exactly has happened. There was a small blood trail leading to potentially where he'd first been attacked and then collapsed.
The blood spatter indicates Mohammed was ambushed. Police go door to door while CSIs search through the cordon.
When you have an outdoor scene, there's lots of considerations to think about. Firstly, it's the weather. Secondly, it's trying to preserve that outdoor scene. Thirdly, it's going to be how difficult it is to search for evidence in the dark. It's late at night, but in the morning, you've got members of the public, they'll all be wanting to go to work, and there'll be a lot of traffic on the road. So time is of the essence on a scene like this.
Before Mohammed reaches hospital, he is pronounced dead from his injuries. Detectives inform his family.
I saw firsthand Mr. Saleem's family and the grief they had. So we're all human, and we all have relatives. He was husband, dad, granddad, heartbreaking. I can't imagine what it was like.
It wasn't just a loss to the family. We lost a very vital part of the community. Uncle Saleem was a lovely man, big family, a lot of grandchildren. He had a very good sense of humor. He was one of the elders that you would always see whenever you came into the mosque. You'd be from the first people to come in, prayed on a chair with a walking stick. He was one of the last people to leave. So he became like a pillar of this mosque. It really had an impact, I must say.
He was well respected and loved, well thought of. That had the biggest impact on me. And so this really does stick out in my mind. But as detectives, we have to keep focused. So we started a murder investigation.
He had 3 stab wounds, which appeared really deep, and it caused really catastrophic injuries, which tends to suggest that this was quite a quick, frenzied attack, and there was very little contact between the two. It's really important to try and work out where the victim has been stabbed, how many times he's been stabbed, what he's been stabbed with.
When the incident happens very quickly, the murderer won't leave much trace. There will always be some kind of trace, but it might be that minute, it's very difficult to find.
The most important thing is obviously to try and find the weapon. So not only can you tie it to the victim from blood, but you can also potentially tie it back to the offender.
As CSIs focus their search, officers need to trace Mohammed's last movements.
He went to prayers every day. He was on his way home from evening prayer at the time he was attacked.
We normally have a very large congregation coming in for the prayer. And when he then left the mosque, there were still people around. And so they were the first ones to actually hear the commotion and then come up to him and trying to help him as much as possible. But he's only lived a couple of minutes away. He's done this journey of going back and forth from his house to the mosque at least 10 times in a day. For something like that then to happen in a matter of seconds, really shocking.
Mohammed was less than 300 meters from home. Detectives speculate why someone would attack such a vulnerable man.
At the time, there was no obvious motive. He still had his wallet with him, so it didn't look like it was a robbery.
This attack makes no sense to anyone. Here we have an elderly man who's walking home using a stick, and they've been attacked with force, brutal force. There's just no explanation.
One of the things we do in an investigation like this, we look at, have there been any similar crimes in the local area? We look at, have there been knife crime, etc. Again, there was nothing there, so there's nothing that would give us a motive for this tragic crime.
With no forensic traces found at the crime scene, detectives need a breakthrough.
Police investigations rely heavily on forensic evidence, and sometimes that evidence just isn't there. At a scene like this, where it's been such a violent attack, that must have been a very difficult conversation. The crime scene manager has to effectively say, we haven't got much evidence. We've got blood and not much else.
This was clearly a very violent attack on Mr. Saleem. Obviously, with his age, very vulnerable man. It's really important to identify the person who's done this, because if they've done this to Mr. Saleem, could they do this to somebody else? We'll be looking for witnesses, so we'll be doing what's called house to house. Anyone seen an actual incident or heard something, we'll also be looking for CCTV. Looking around with the cameras there, with the cameras covering the way to and from that scene. It's really important for us to find out who's done it and arrest them as quickly as we can.
"82-year-old grandfather Mohammed Saleem has been stabbed and murdered while walking home. With no forensic traces at the scene, the major crime unit looked to the post-mortem for any intelligence on the murder weapon.
Looking at the victim's 3 stab wounds would give you a potential indication of what kind of weapon might have been used. And it was indicated that it was a large hunting knife that had been used to kill Mr. Saleem. He had no defence injuries on his arms or any injuries on the front of his body, which immediately infers that he wasn't facing his attacker. He was either running away or walking away from somebody, and he's been attacked from behind.
This tells me that there is somebody here who targeted this elderly gentleman and for some reason had a real hatred towards him. They are driven purely by an emotion that we need to understand. The police need to explore all possible leads and all possible motivations for the attack.
As searches for the weapon continue, detectives request CCTV footage from over 60 cameras.
The whole idea of examining CCTV is not just to try and find the offence itself, but also to backtrack and forward track what's happened before the offence and after. We need to try and find the route that the offender's taken, not just into the scene, but also away from the scene.
The digital forensic team uncovers a potential lead.
As part of that CCTV trawl, we did find an image of a male running away, quite a few roads away from the scene. Were they running from the scene of a murder, or were they running from something else? We needed to trace that person. Had they seen something, or were they involved?
The footage is analysed frame by frame.
Officers tried to identify who that person is, but it wasn't a very good image. It just wasn't good enough to identify the person from it. But then looking for other CCTV to see if they could find them elsewhere in the area.
The grainy CCTV is released to the press. The effect ripples through the community.
Small Heath is a very close-knit, mainly a Muslim community. Lots of families all know each other. Lots of people worship at the mosque. So certainly it was a tremendous shock for people living in that road and that surrounding area.
It's a very nice area to live in. Beautiful vibe. I'd like to describe it as. I've been around this area for about 20 years now, so I'm quite fond of it. It's very multicultural. It's the last area where we've thought that we would feel unsafe. We have elderly and vulnerable people, just like Uncle Saleem, leaving their house quite late at night for the prayer, or very early in the morning for the morning prayers. And so for something to happen here cause that level of fear and confusion.
There are growing concerns that Mohammed was deliberately targeted, and the community is under attack.
The Mr. Saleem case, where we know that it's a Muslim with a visible identity, he's left his prayers, he's going home, and he's targeted. And therefore, most people believe that Mohammed Saleem was not a spontaneous attack, it was a premeditated, planned attack. It's a hate crime, ultimately. The climate at the time was very kind of hostile and Islamophobic.
There was a rise in Islamophobic attacks. A lot of these sporadic attacks started to happen where ladies would have their headscarf ripped off, would be intimidated, would be verbally abused. It's a very difficult period where now you have to reassure even those who are vulnerable and try to make them comfortable and secure and safe.
There was a real sense of sadness, a real sense of fear. Visiting the mosque and other places, there was a sense of working together and unifying together and actually being careful about your safety.
The major crime unit tries to alleviate the community's fears, while CSIs continue to search for any trace of Mohammed's killer.
At a scene like this, where it's been such a violent attack, there's pressure to find the evidence, but sometimes the evidence just isn't there. And it's very difficult sometimes to convey that to investigations team and the SIO. We effectively can't produce the goods. We can't produce the evidence to prove or disprove who's attacked and murdered this gentleman. We're hoping that there's further evidence or further intelligence that comes to light, which might then reignite investigations into the crime.
We very much kept an open mind. It was still a horrendous crime. We just wanted to catch the person before anything else happened.
Then, a call comes in that changes the course of the investigation.
There was a bang that evening. It was close to the Aisha Mosque in Walsall, by some railings by the side of the mosque. People who lived close by saw child lunchbox was in lots of pieces, but there were elements of what we now know as a bomb. At that time, I think it's fair to say we're all worried. A decision was made that the counter-terrorism unit would investigate that.
150 people were moved from their homes and helped by the local authority as the bomb squad was called and the area cordoned off.
Fortunately, no one is harmed. The counter-terrorism unit arrive at the scene and CSIs enter the cordon.
An explosion is a completely different type of crime scene. It's really important to try and ascertain what caused the explosions. Getting any forensic evidence from this device is crucial to that investigation. It needs to be done methodically but quickly to try and ascertain who's put the device together. Finding the component parts of a device can help detectives do further research into where those parts come from to then try and identify who's purchased these items. There are specialist forensic labs that deal with explosives. So the FEL lab, which is the Forensic Explosive Lab, that deals specifically with incendiary devices and bombs. So that lab is the lab that's used to investigate and to effectively put the device back together and work out what the component parts are of the device.
The remnants of the bomb are sent to the FEL for analysis.
An IED is an improvised explosive device, and simply it is an explosive device that is made by an individual or individuals, normally in a domestic premises or outside of a professional setting. The material that was used in this particular case is what we call a peroxide explosive. In terms of its explosive power, it has an explosive power of about 3/4 that of TNT. So it's quite a substantial charge.
But the bomber made a life-saving mistake.
The device in the incident here only partially went off. You didn't get a full involvement of all the charge that was in there. The person who's made the device hasn't been particularly good at making the chemicals that you need to cause the charge to detonate, essentially.
The person who set it hadn't got it quite right. Thankfully, the consequences could have been horrendous.
The community would be absolutely frightened. At this point, they would know that they're being targeted. There is somebody out there who have a clear hostility and prejudice towards them. The police need to contain the fear and the anxiety of the community whilst also being very focused on their investigation.
Forensics look for traces of the offender on the lunchbox that housed the bomb.
Normally, explosive devices don't cause fires. They normally just explode. Therefore, the potential for being able to find fingerprints and DNA on the component parts of the device is quite high. First thing to do on an exhibit like this would be to swab for DNA. Use a pointy swab, because the pointy swab gets into all the nooks and crannies in the grooves. I'm going to swab the zips. What you're trying to do is find out who may have handled this. The outside surface of this lunchbox is fabric, so it's very difficult to get any fingerprints from there. Potentially fingerprints some of the inside. The powder that I'm going to use is black magnetic. And then just slowly use the powders to see if you can develop any fingerprints. I'm just running the powder over the surface to see if there's any marks. But there's no fingerprints on the inside of this section here.
The perpetrator appears to have been careful to leave no trace. The digital forensic team scours all CCTV opportunities.
Our CCTV trawl has to start where the bomb was left. So we started to look at everyone who'd walked in to that scene within the hours before the bomb went off and walked out in that time. And eventually we did identify a male. He walked in with a bag and walked out without the bag. And the bag looked very much the size of our bomb. So that was our starting point. And our starting point then goes to what we call tracking. And when he left the scene, we look at which way did he go. I call it a foot chase by CCTV. Did he go down that road? If we track every camera he went on the road, every time a car goes past, the danger is has he got in a car or not?
The digital team trawls through hours of CCTV in search of the bomber. In Small Heath, police speak to locals for any leads to Mohammed's killer. Then, another terrifying event hits the West Midlands. Exactly 3 weeks after the Walsall explosion, a second mosque is targeted.
When that bomb went off, the size of the explosion sent shrapnel quite a distance right across roads, broke windows, embedded itself in trees. Thankfully, nobody was injured. Had anyone been in the way of any of that shrapnel, they would have been severely injured, if not worse. It was happening on a Friday. It was during Ramadan. This was declared as a terrorist incident because it looked like a direct attack on a mosque.
This bomb was set to go off 10 minutes before Friday prayers were taking place. Now, Friday is an important day for the Islamic religion, and this bomb maker knew that there would be a large number of people gathering to pray at this time. So this person was intent on causing maximum impact, targeting the Islamic population.
Thankfully, because it was during Ramadan, the times of prayers had changed. Otherwise, it would have been full of people walking to and from the mosque. There would have been people in the streets outside. There would have been a number of casualties.
This event escalated it to a different level. Of course, Fridays for us is a special day. I always compare it to the Sunday for the Christians and the Saturday for the Jews. It's our special day. So we'd have a very large congregational prayer on Fridays. And for us not to feel safe on that day, it's a very sad thing, to be honest. Because for someone to do something to such a large gathering of people on their holy day, on their special day, it takes a certain level of hate to then commit a crime like that.
The bomb attacks against the mosques had a similar flavor, but their violent tendencies have moved forward because they're not apprehended by the police. Maybe that gives them this willpower, this kind of idea, empowerment, that I can go out and do something more kind of damaging. And this could be them planning and plotting these bombs so that he can maim and kill more Muslims.
Looking at the days, 2 bombs we known gone off on a Friday. So our concern was another bomb going to go off the following Friday? So this was a real critical incident.
Following the bomber's MO, the counter-terrorism team fears the next bomb will be even more powerful and could be fatal.
We've got a bomber operating in this area. We need to find out who they are before it's too late.
The West Midlands Major Crime Unit are searching for the killer of grandfather and community figure, Mohammed Saleem.
It was a shock because it was the last thing that people would ever think would happen. Who in his right mind would attack an 82-year-old vulnerable man walking with a walking stick? He was a very lovely person, very strong family orientated as well. So yeah, had a very strong impact on the community.
Counter-terrorism have deployed a team of CSIs to the scene of a second bomb attack outside a mosque in the West Midlands.
When an explosion happens, there's a huge amount of destruction. There's a lot of debris that can be thrown from quite a huge area. It's paramount to try and recover the maximum evidence. So the cordons for the area have to be set a lot wider, and the search teams have to search a lot more in the surrounding areas, looking for parts of the device or anything that might have been damaged by that device. All the vital bits of shrapnel and evidence that's come out of that bomb is recovered, because it's really important to check if there's any unique markings on any of the nuts and bolts or screws within the device. Therefore, you might be able to find out where those were made and sold, because that might tell you who your offender is.
From the radius of destruction, it's clear that this is a much more powerful device than the Walsall bomb.
The second device, essentially you're dealing with at least 0.5 kilogram of equivalent TNT. By the very virtue of the fact that they're adding additional shrapnel to a device, that indicates that you have an intention to cause harm or loss of life. The people that do this sort of thing, where they're making explosives, almost similar to serial arsonists in terms of they tend to get better at what they do the more they do it. first or second device may or may not work so well. And then as you go through the process, they get better at making the chemicals, they get better at setting the device off. People like this can be driven to improve and get better because they're essentially practicing.
This is somebody who is intent on causing harm and fear. They are starting to build a bit more confidence at every stage, trying to make it bigger and more harmful. It is a real concern.
With the bombings just 3 weeks apart, the counter-terrorism team believe they have just 6 days left before the next attack. They must determine which of the 200 mosques in the West Midlands will be targeted next.
We recognised that there was a real threat to the Muslim community. We felt under a lot of pressure to catch this person. We were just really concerned another incident, someone else could lose their lives. Within West Midlands Police, we had officers working around the clock. The whole force was working 12-hour shifts because we had to protect our Muslim community from any more attacks.
The team's strongest lead is the grainy figure seen on CCTV at the Walsall crime scene. Searching through hundreds of hours of footage across the region, digital experts trace his movements.
When he left the scene, we tracked him all the way across Walsall into Walsall bus station and got a bus into Birmingham. He was very CCTV aware. He had a cap on. It makes it more difficult. See him get off a bus in Birmingham. He walks past the bull ring, quite distinctive there. And then really coolly, he goes into a shop and buys a bottle of wine. So we're looking at the CCTV in the shop, trying to see a facial image. But he's really careful, had his head down all the time, as if he was really conscious of this. And then we tracked him out of the shop, and then he gets onto another bus. We then track that bus, and he gets off in Small Heath.
The bus stop is just meters away from where Mohammed Saleem was murdered.
This was a real turning point for the investigation. Our working hypothesis was he lives somewhere in the Small Heath area. So what we then thought is, let's try and find him going out. He might not have been as careful. We tracked a lot of buses going out from Small Heath to Birmingham and then to Walsall earlier on that day, on the 21st of June. So by looking through those images, we eventually found that person and we found a full facial image of him. And this was a real breakthrough moment for us. We saw he was carrying a bag.
Police believe the bag is housing the Walsall bomb, putting everyone on the bus in danger.
The peroxide explosive HMTD has a very high shock sensitivity and a very high friction sensitivity as well. So you can initiate it with friction or shock quite easily. So it can easily be set off unintentionally if you're transporting it. So carrying it around in a bus, if you drop whatever it is you've got in your hand, is the potential with these sorts of explosives that they may detonate.
We know how easily that could have been detonated. So on a full capacity bus, the consequences would have been horrific. This suspect is taking all the risks that they need to cause maximum damage.
Detective Superintendent Sean Edwards wastes no time prioritizing the bag as his next lead.
We saw the bag came from a local superstore. As detectives, we went to that supermarket and got the CCTV for that day and found him in the store on that day, coming out of the shop with the bag that we subsequently carried to Walsall. So now we had two clear facial images. It was really imperative to try and identify this person. We strongly believe that was our bomber.
With just 3 days to go before the next suspected bomb attack, the CCTV images are circulated around the West Midlands.
We put a lot of officers in the area with his photograph, trying to find him. And then we circulated his photograph to the media, asking who knows this person. Really surprisingly, we didn't get any calls at all. No one named him.
Detectives put all resources on the ground in Smallheath.
We targeted that area by old-fashioned detective work. We had so many officers on there working 12 hours a day because of this threat. There was 2 local neighbourhood officers who knew the community in Smallheath. We went into this industrial area and showed these images. Do you know this person? And one of the receptionists said, yeah, that's one of the forest students who is staying here.
Just one day before the next feared bomb attack, the suspect is named as Pavlo Lapshin.
He was from Ukraine. He'd been in the country a few weeks. He was living in a adapted warehouse as part of an exchange program, which is why he wasn't known and why we didn't get any calls about him. They called on the radio that he was there and they went to arrest him. He did struggle with them, but he was quickly restrained and arrested.
A search warrant is secured for his accommodation.
The home address of the suspect was a flat above the factory. So that crime scene then becomes a huge crime scene that needs a lot of attention.
You're entering a completely unknown area or unknown scene with materials or risks that, again, are unknown. Obviously, going into anything like that is going to be inherently dangerous because you simply don't know what you're dealing with when you walk in.
The factory had to be evacuated. The neighbouring houses would need to be evacuated. You're going to have to send police officers into that scene, but there's the risk of more devices. There's the risk to human life of the members of the public. Is the address booby-trapped? It needs a lot of specialists attending, and it needs to be a very controlled and methodical examination without risk to anybody's life.
As soon as the area is evacuated, specialist search teams enter his flat.
When we searched his home, it was quite chilling. We found several other bombs. The bombs he was making seemed to increase in power. There were a number ready to go with another component, so mobile phones, chemicals, and he started putting those together. Quite a sophisticated way. He obviously knew how to put bombs together. That told us he was planning a campaign, and what we feared, that he was planning a campaign, would have come true had he not been caught.
When a house search is conducted, not only do you have to recover the component parts of the device, but also he's been seen on CCTV wearing clothing. It's really important to search the property for that clothing because forensic tests need to be done on that clothing. Is there anything that will be able to confirm what we've got at the crime scene?
Clothing, matching those seen on CCTV, is fast-tracked to the lab.
I'm going to put my needle in the bag and suck out a portion of air. The initial investigation would be to examine if there's any contaminants, so if there's any chemical that can be detected on the air in the bag above the exhibit. And you're looking for any accelerants or volatile liquids that have seeped off the exhibit within the bag that might link back to the explosion. So then you place this into a knife tube. Secure it in an exhibit bag. These knife tubes have metal ends to prevent any movement of the exhibit and any damage. I'm now going to pop the bag open and get the item out. So I'm going to mini tape the inside, remove the surface of this tape. It reveals the sticky side to it. And then you would mini tape the area where, either around the waistband or inside of the pockets where you're most likely to get where is DNA. And you just pop the mini tape on the stern back into the pot.
CSIs recover all of Lapshin's personal devices.
We would look at any digital evidence, so mobile phones, computers, they would be seized and downloaded by digital forensics teams so that we can ascertain exactly what searches he's been doing. The digital forensics teams are incredible. They can recover a lot of evidence from a digital device, even if it looks like it's been deleted.
They prioritize his laptop.
By looking at that, we found quite a wealth of evidence against him. On there, he'd been searching himself. The mosques that he targeted, he'd done a Google search of those. He'd looked at how to get to and from them. So we could see that it had been meticulously planned.
Among Lapshin's files, investigators make a disturbing discovery.
Chillingly, he'd also searched details on the murder of Mohammed Saleem. And in there we found a photograph of him holding a knife, which the pathologist said that is the type of knife that would have caused those injuries. So we believe this was a knife that killed Mohammed Saleem. And this for us was quite a remarkable moment because we could see that clearly he would be the main suspect for both the murder and the bombings.
Police have arrested Pavlo Lapshin for 2 bomb attacks outside mosques in the West Midlands. And now evidence points to him also being the killer of 82-year-old Mohammed Saleem.
It was on the 29th of April.
Я был в районе мечети.
I was around the mosque.
Его я не знал.
I did not know that person.
Убийство было совершено по мотивам расовой ненависти.
A murder was committed on the basis of racial hatred.
Нанес 3 удара ножом.
I used a knife. I stabbed him 3 times.
When we interviewed Pavlo Lapshin through an interpreter, he admitted what he'd done, but he's very proud of what he'd done. And when we asked why he'd done it, he said, because he's not white and I am white, I wanted to increase racial conflict. So a real chilling motive for the murder of Mohammed Saleem. We were all monitoring the interview. He said to us, yeah, I set all 3 bombs off. And that was news to us because we only knew the 2. When we asked him about the other one, he told us it was one in Wolverhampton. He gave us details of it. He set on a roundabout by the mosque in Wolverhampton. That hadn't been reported to the police previously. We sent officers to the scene, looked at the roundabout and found fragments of a small explosion that had gone off there.
The discovery of fragments of a device on this roundabout opposite the mosque showed there'd been an explosion there several weeks ago. The 3rd time a Muslim place of prayer had been targeted in the last month.
Those 2 crimes, in terms of MO, as it were, might be different, but the motivation behind them is exactly the same. It's just pure racism.
Lapshin actually says that he wants a race war. This was all about biological superiority. This idea that people of color were inferior to people who were white. He wanted to be part of this idea of him being a soldier fighting for this greater cause against the Muslim invaders. As a soldier, Lapshin can justify his actions because he legitimizes the victims.
On the 22nd of July, Pavlo Lapshin is charged with the terrorist-related murder of Mohammed Saleem.
Having the knife would have been the icing on the cake. However, he'd already admitted it. He told us things that he didn't, that only the murderer would know. We have pictures of him holding a knife, which the pathologist said that is the type of knife that would have caused those injuries. So we were very confident the evidence we had.
Even though the offender's admitted the crime, at any stage, he might turn up in court and then say, oh, not guilty. And therefore, we have to have prepared a case to be able to still prove beyond reasonable doubt that this is our offender and this is what he's done.
We didn't know whether he would want to have his day in court to espouse his ideology. So that was our concern, and we planned for a trial. We wanted to clearly show this was a racist, a terrorist intent on causing fear amongst the Muslim community and actually murdered Mr. Saleem. So I sent staff out to Ukraine to liaise with the Ukrainian authorities just to understand more about Pavlo Lapshin. What we found was a young man who'd been at university, had done very well at university, so much so he'd got on an exchange programme to come to the UK. We know when we're speaking to local police that he'd been trying setting off bombs in Ukraine just to test an experiment. He'd been dealt with for what they termed as a health and safety incident, where he'd actually blown his kitchen up in his house. He obviously knew how to put bombs together. When we looked at his laptop, there were photos of quite large explosions that we found out were in Ukraine. These were bombs he'd set off. But in the UK, he wasn't successful. I think part of the issue was his English wasn't brilliant, so translating the chemicals he had in Ukraine to the chemicals in the UK may have accounted for them not going off quite right, but he was obviously honing his skills, honing his English, his chemistry knowledge.
Detectives work with Ukrainian authorities to establish if Lapshin was part of any terrorist groups.
It's also really important to see if there's any other offenders. Has he been working alone, or are there other people within his network? And if so, they need to be identified and arrested.
Police are finding a lot of literature around online radicalization. They find lots of white supremacist memorabilia. He's searching white supremacist websites. He uses that as an inspiration. He's radicalizing himself. And this is why people call him a lone wolf.
We were very confident nobody else was involved. We were very confident he was what we call self-initiated terrorist. He wasn't directed by anybody else. But I think he thought he maybe was cleverer than us. He took great steps. He was very forensically aware. He never took a mobile phone with him because he knew we'd use that. Equally, with both the murder and the bombings, he washed everything in high-strength vodka because he thought that'd get rid of most of the forensic traces. He did think he got away with it, as it were, and was planning on carrying on.
Lapshin's search history reveals that before moving to the UK, he was researching where he could buy explosive chemicals. Just 2 days after moving to Smallheath, he brought a large hunting knife, which matches the fatal injuries inflicted on Mohammed Saleem.
The police can see search histories related to 2 years ago, what he's planning. So when he comes to the UK, he finds a victim, unfortunately in this case Mohammed Saleem, and then he's motivated to commit that act of violence. So although it only takes him days to commit this act of terrorism, in fact he's been planning this over a very long time before.
Even though in both of these crime scenes there wasn't much physical traditional forensic evidence, fingerprints, DNA, footprints, tire marks, there's always digital evidence.
At trial, Lapshin pleads guilty to the 3 bombings and to the racially motivated murder of Mohammed Saleem. He is sentenced to life, with a minimum of 40 years.
The evidence we had was overwhelming. But he showed no remorse for this. An elderly man who was well respected and loved, taken away for a horrible racist motive.
The tragic death of Mr. Saleem had a huge impact. The murder teaches us lots of different lessons, and part of those is trying to come together as a community, as one. We need to unite when it comes to incidents like this. Terrorism tries to create a psychological fear, and we need to show that as a community, as a group, we're not afraid, and that you don't have to be Muslim to be impacted by Islamophobia. It's a hate crime, ultimately, and a hate crime has no place in any society.
At the end of a case like that, from a policing perspective, it is a satisfaction to see a dangerous terrorist go to prison for the rest of his life and keep people safe. That's why we joined the police service. But part of that, you take away with you the family, and I can't imagine the grief and loss that Mr. Saleem's family went through.
Uncle Saleem always had that very contagious smile. He'd always be open to speak to people and give advice. He's a very lovely man, very respectable man, and very respected as well.
you.